We're on 107 already?
All right, so last week, oh, hold on. So last week we discussed the story of James and Anna. They told the story of them traveling to the west and what they expected on the journey. Remember, they wanted to catch buffalo. We talked about the songs and all of that. So let's go to page 107 and we'll talk about the Underground Railroad. Has anyone heard of that before? Yes, no.
Yeah, I remember.
Harriet Tubman. Tubman do it.
The Underground Railroad.
Remember that word?
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman. I never heard of it.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about.
Which page again?
Yep.
What's it about?
Yes, Michael, you had a question?
Which page was it?
107.
The Underground Railroad. This page? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
107.
The Underground Railroad.
107. Okay.
At 107?
Yes.
Yep.
107.
Found it.
All right, so let's talk about the Underground Railroad. So, a part of America's history, yes, we have all the hearing about them traveling west, about the colonies, but during this time, there was something called slavery going on at that time. Has anyone heard of slavery before? Yes, and so it was a very unfortunate time in history. It was a time where Black people were forced to become slaves. They had to work on plantations and they were treated really bad. They were beaten. They would separate families. It was a really, really bad time. And they had no reason why they made them slaves. It was just because of the color of their skin, and it was wrong. And so during this time, we had people that knew that slavery was wrong and they wanted to escape from slavery. Slavery mostly took place in the southern states. I'm going to show you on a map what I mean by the southern states. Okay, let me pull it up here. So this is like, okay, so the South will be like here, down here kind of, okay? So that's where slavery mostly was in the South. So Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, all of this, they had slaves. They had a lot of plantations, a lot of slaves. And so, like I said, it just wasn't a good thing. They didn't pay them for their work. They treated them bad. It was just a really bad thing. They went and got them from Africa, brought them here. It was really bad. And so there were people who knew that slavery was wrong and that it was not right. And so they fought for the African Americans, the Black people who were slaves, to become free. So you had something like the Underground Railroad was one of those things that they started, which helped slaves to escape. They would usually try to escape slavery and they would go to the North because there wasn't really any slavery in the North, and it was a little better for Black people in the North. If you lived in the South, you would probably become a slave. But if you went to the North, it could be it wasn't perfect, but you wouldn't have to be a slave, let's say that. So let's go ahead and look at page 107 and we'll learn about the Underground Railroad. Okay, anyone would like to volunteer to read first? Okay, go ahead, Cullen.
There are some very different parts in America's history. One of those difficult times dealt with slavery. You have probably learned what slavery is from some of your Bible stories. Do you remember how Joseph was sold as a slave into Egypt? Slaves have been brought to America during colonial times. As our country grew, more slaves were brought to America, but many Americans who volunteered their freedom disagreed with slavery. Some spoke out against slavery. Others helped slaves escape to freedom through the Underground Railroad.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so we discussed what slavery was, and this is a part of America's history. And so the first slaves came here in 1619. And they were actually slaves for a long time. And next week we'll get into when they actually the war that was fought. But anyway, so that was when it started here. So it's unfortunate that they talk about a lot of colonial America and how it was growing at that time, but they don't discuss that there was slavery going on at that same time. And so it was not good at all. So a lot of the things like how they wrote the Declaration of Independence and all of that, that was not for everyone. That was mostly written for those who were from Europe, those who had came to from England. It wasn't really for the slaves. The slaves had no rights and no freedoms at all. So like I said, some people knew it was wrong and they began to speak out against slavery, and they said that people needed to be free. So that's where they formed the Underground Railroad. So the most famous person of the Underground Railroad is Harriet Tubman. Has everyone heard of Harriet Tubman before? I'm sure you may have heard of her before.
Last year.
Yeah, so she was one of the leaders of the Underground Railroad. She was one who helped a lot of slaves escape. They had other people like William Steele and Thomas Garrett, but most people, whenever they talk about Harriet Tubman, she is known for leading the Underground Railroad. She was very brave. All right, turn to page 108.
Ooh.
All right, let's see. Go ahead, Cadence.
The Underground Railroad was not really a railroad, nor was it under the ground. It was a secret way that many Americans helped slaves escape to freedom. It was probably called a railroad because each safe house along the way to freedom was called a station, and the people that lived there were called station masters.
Good. You can stop there. Okay, good. We're gonna finish. Let me just pause. So the Underground Railroad was not really a railroad. Sometimes people think like it actually means like a train. It was not that. They really gave it that name to confuse people, because when people heard about the Underground Railroad and how slaves were escaping, they were really looking for an underground railroad. And that's not really what it was. It was just a path that they took to get to escape from slavery. So whenever those who wanted to keep the slaves, they would hear about the Underground Railroad, they were probably looking for a real railroad. And that's not what it was. That was just the name they called it. So as they escaped from slavery, they would go to stations. And so there were station masters who were the people who would help the slaves get to the next station. So it usually was someone's house. So they would escape from the plantation, they would go to one of the stations, stay safely there, but they couldn't stay too long. Then they had to leave and go to the next station. So that's how it worked all the way up until they got to the north. They would travel from station to station until they were able to freely come out, live out instead of being a slave. Okay? All right, so let's keep reading. You can pick up where you left off, Cadence.
Okay, the station master.
Yeah, and then the next part, the people.
Okay, the people that helped slaves get from one station to the next were called
Conductors.
Conductors. Since most of the slavery was happening in the southern states, the Underground Railroad was a journey north all the way to Canada. Many Americans worked together in the Underground Railroad. One of them was an escaped slave named Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
She and others helped a great many slaves safely because to escape to freedom.
Very good. Okay, so the people who would help the slaves get from the next place were called the conductors. So the station masters were the people that lived in those homes where they stayed. Then the conductors were those who helped them get from each station safely, okay? So the Underground Railroad went all the way to Canada. So some of the people escaped all the way up north to Canada. We know where Canada is, right? It's above the United States.
Yes.
So some of them escaped all the way up to Canada. And so, like we said, Harriet Tubman was one of the pioneers in the Underground Railroad. She led the people. So those who worked on the Underground Railroad were also called the abolitionists because they wanted to abolish slavery, which means to get rid of slavery. That was something they really, really wanted to do. And so I'm sure it was very dangerous to escape and to try to leave. But, you know, they just had faith that God was going to protect them and that they wanted to be free. So think about it. If you were alive during that time, would you escape or would you stay? What would you do?
Escape.
Because it was dangerous if you tried to escape. It was very dangerous. So would you go for it? If you could have escaped, would you left? Would you have left?
Left.
Yes.
Left.
So,
Escape.
yeah. So what about, would you be a station master or a conductor? Would you welcome them in your home or would you be one to lead them from station to station?
Station.
Or a conductor?
Going to station to station.
Actually,
Going to station.
Station to station.
Station to station.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. All right. So we're gonna look at a little video on Harriet Tubman.
Yay!
Wait, is it gonna be talking?
Huh?
Yeah.
Talking like, can we hear
Yes. Yeah. You'll be able
Miss
to hear it this
Prudence?
time. Yes.
Miss Ludens, can we do the song too? Because I know the whole thing.
Yeah. We're gonna do it after.
I don't want to do the song because I don't know it.
Yeah. Me too. I know.
Me too.
The whole thing.
Let's do the song because I have no idea what it is.
All right. So let's. Oh, hold on. I got it playing. Sorry, I didn't show it to y'all. Let me show the screen. All right.
Oh, here we go. This is mute myself.
Can you hear?
Everyone has.
Can you hear?
Just now.
No.
No.
No?
I cannot hear it.
No, I can't.
Okay, let me hold on.
All I see is picture. I only see the picture in the other side.
What about now?
No, I don't hear it.
No, I don't hear nothing. All I see is a thingy.
All we see is
Flower.
Flower.
Wait, how about we all mute ourselves? How
Maybe
about
that,
we
yeah,
mute
that's what I'm about to do. Mute everyone and then
Mute.
I'm gonna get it figured out. Hold on. 1 second.
When do you think she's gonna be back?
I hope so. Oh.
Everybody mute yourself.
Yeah, everybody mute. Even though somebody's whispering, for everybody to mute. Okay. So let me put it back on. All right. So if you can hear it, just give me, I'm not playing it yet, but I'll let you know when. Okay.
Escaping slavery, risking everything to save her
Can
family,
we hear?
leading a military raid, championing the cause of women's suffrage. These are just a handful of the accomplishments of one of America's most courageous heroes. Harriet Tubman was born Araminta Ross in Dorchester County, Maryland, in the early 1820s. Born into chattel slavery, Araminta, or Minty, was the fifth of 9 children. 2 of Minty's older sisters were sold to a chain gang. Even as a small child, Minty was hired out to different owners who subjected her to whippings and punishment. Young Minty's life changed forever on an errand to a neighborhood store. There, an overseer threw a 2-pound weight at a fugitive enslaved person, missed, and struck Minty instead. Her injury caused her to experience sleeping spells, which we know of today as narcolepsy, for the rest of her life. Minty's owner tried to sell her, but there were no buyers for an enslaved person who fell into sleeping spells. She was instead put to work with her father, Ben Ross, who taught her how to lumber. Lumbering increased Minty's physical strength and put her in touch with free black sailors who shipped the wood to the north. From them, Minty learned about the secret communications that occurred along trade routes, information that would prove invaluable later in her life. In this
It's too loud.
free and enslaved blacks working side by side, Minty met John Tubman, a free black man she married in 1844. After marriage, she renamed herself Harriet after her mother. Harriet Tubman's owner died in 1849. When his widow planned to sell off her enslaved human beings, Harriet feared she would be sold away from everyone she loved. She had heard of an underground railroad, a secret network of safe houses, boat captains, and wagon drivers willing to harbor fugitive enslaved people on their way north. So Tubman fled with two of her brothers, Ben and Harry. They eventually turned back, fearing they were lost. But in one of her sleeping spells, Harriet dreamed that she could fly like a bird. Looking down below, she saw the path to liberation, and in the autumn of 1849, she set out on her own, following the North Star to Pennsylvania and to freedom. Tubman returned to the South 13 times to free her niece, brothers, parents, and many others. She earned the nickname Black Moses and worked diligently with fellow abolitionists to help enslaved people escape, first to the North and later to Canada. Harriet Tubman worked as a Union Army nurse, scout, and spy during the Civil War. In 1863, she became the first woman in United States history to plan and lead a military raid, liberating nearly 700 enslaved persons in South Carolina. After the war, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution legally abolished slavery, while the 14th expanded citizenship and the 15th gave voting rights to formerly enslaved Black men. But she was undaunted, and she persisted. She raised funds for formerly enslaved persons and helped build schools and a hospital on their behalf. In 1888, Tubman became more active in the fight for women's right to vote. In 1896, she appeared at the founding convention of the National Association of Colored Women in Washington, D.C., and later at a women's suffrage meeting in Rochester, New York. There she told the audience, "I was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and I can say what many others cannot. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." As her fame grew, various friends and allies helped her in the fight to collect a veteran's pension for her service in the Union Army. In 1899, she was finally granted $20 a month. In a fitting twist of fate, the United States Treasury announced in 2016 that Tubman's image will appear on a redesigned $20 bill. Harriet Tubman died on March 10, 1913. Even on her deathbed,